Hey, great news, pandemic's over. That's basically the announcement from the governor today, who also announced the pandemic was over before the last wave of the virus as well. But this time, federal health leaders are on board. That means dropping mask guidelines across much of the country. We look at the connection between war in Ukraine, energy production in Colorado, and what everyone pays for gas. And two stone monuments stand in a rapidly changing part of Colorado, so it may be time for them to go. All that is next. Colorado's governor has pronounced the pandemic basically over before, and then we watched a surge cost lives and strain healthcare workers. Governor's back at it this time with some real evidence that COVID cases are at a low level and expected to stay there for the foreseeable future. Today, Democratic Governor Jared Polis announced that Coloradans who have got 3 doses of the vaccine should just go about our lives as normal again. 2 quick points on that. A lot of people did that a long time ago. And for vaccinated but medically vulnerable Coloradans, the governor's advice doesn't really apply.
There's no declaring victory. The virus will likely be with us as long as we're alive. Just as the emergency health phase ended last year, what we're really indicating today is the people of Colorado should view the emergency phase of this virus as over. That doesn't mean that the virus is gone. It doesn't mean you can't get it. But it means if you're fully vaccinated with all 3 doses, you don't have a lot to worry about if you're otherwise healthy. If you're immunocompromised, you might want to take additional precautions, at least for the next few weeks as rates continue to go down.
Polis is signaling what many public health leaders are, that the virus is moving toward an endemic phase where it's always going to be around like the flu, but no longer something that's causing so much disruption that we order our lives around it. The state is setting up plans for future large-scale health emergencies with a particular focus on healthcare staffing, which was such a consistent problem for the last 2 years. So masks are no longer required in Colorado, though individual businesses might post a sign asking you to wear one. And that mirrors new guidelines from the CDC, which today loosened federal mask-wearing guidelines. The CDC says about 70% of the U.S. population is living in a place where there is low or medium COVID-19 levels. And for those areas, the CDC no longer advises wearing a mask in public indoor places unless you're immunocompromised. There's still about 28% of the population living in places where the CDC considers COVID transmission to be high and recommends masking. So you look at this in terms of Colorado. CDC tracks it by county. High transmission, mask recommended, those are in orange. So basically all of northwest Colorado, most of southern Colorado, and northeast Colorado. That's where the CDC recommends wearing masks indoors. Hate to say this, but good luck with that. Our state's plummeting positivity rate is a big reason why Colorado's public health leaders are confident in calling this pandemic over. 4.5% of COVID-19 tests were done in the state over the last 7 days, came back positive. We are at nearly 30% during early January and the height of the Omicron wave. After court testimony today, we are waiting on a ruling from a judge on whether Dougco School's conservative school board majority violated the law. The progressive minority accuses them of deciding between themselves privately that they were going to fire the superintendent and then eventually coming out to do it in a public meeting. The board president, Mike Peterson, was asked if he regretted how all this went down.
In clear hindsight, do I regret my vote on February 4th? No. In clear hindsight, would I have done some things differently sequentially? Probably yes.
Dougco Schools may also face another lawsuit from its fired superintendent, Corey Wise. The board majority chose to fire him without cause under his contract. That triggered a payout. But then the board president went on talk radio and said they did have a fireable offense to get rid of the superintendent, but just chose not to use it. Colorado's shoring up its cyber security as the governor announces sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Ukraine, which leads to the question, what specifically in Colorado would be under threat from the Russians? Anusha Roy explains.
Colorado leaders are getting messages from the federal government.
Issued a shields up order to all organizations around the country to be extra vigilant.
The ask was to plan for the worst when it comes to cyber attacks. After Russia attacked Ukraine, accompanied by cyber attacks on the Ukrainian government and infrastructure.
Modern day warfare, if you will, also has this cyber component.
Cybersecurity in Colorado is being emphasized for a few reasons. The Fed said in wake of sanctions imposed by the U.S. and allies, organizations need to be prepared for the possibility of retaliation.
There is no such thing as the world away. And so the world is so interconnected that Russia and every other country on the planet is right next door from, a cyber point of view.
Professor Steve Beatty with MSU Denver said the things we rely on day to day are the very things that need extra protection right now.
There's an organization inside the FBI called InfraGard that I participated in. And so they list then the critical parts of, what is it that we need to function as a society.
We are talking about our electric grid, transportation, natural gas, and our banks.
At the state level, we have a lot of citizen information that we have to protect.
At a state level, this means continuing to talk with critical infrastructure like RTD and DIA about ongoing security measures and doubling down on monitoring around the clock.
Notice where certain information is coming from in terms of your IP address. So we can really detect certain countries, and we know exactly where that information is coming from. So we will potentially put more monitoring on those addresses just to see what's there.
We talked to a humanitarian group that is currently trying to figure out if they can help families in Ukraine. One of the things they have to be 100% sure of is that any information they're sharing with families about evacuations has to be accurate, but that there's also a lot of really bad information circulating. They're also taking cybersecurity into account because they said Russia is so technologically sophisticated. They have to make sure their info and their data don't get hacked, which could then put people in danger. And you didn't see or directly hear from this group today, Kyle, because of those safety concerns.
So you've got a lot of individual companies and nonprofits making their own choices based on levels of exposure.
Right. So here's the thing, is that Ukraine is also a big tech hub. So there's a lot of people with a lot of tech talent over there working for U.S. companies. So that's a big connection between the U.S. and this region. But the Professor Beatty was saying that when you're talking about cybersecurity, one of the easiest things to do when it comes to safety, you go offline. And that means companies have been shutting down internal communications with their employees and then frantically trying to find other ways to get a hold of them to see if they're okay. And that's terrifying for coworkers, and it's also translating it to becoming even more difficult for families to connect with their loved ones as well.
Makes sense. All right, Anusha, thank you. State pension fund is going to divest millions of dollars worth of investments in Russian-owned assets. The Colorado Public Employees Retirement Association, PARA, says it's doing this because of the federal mandates pertaining to sanctions on Russian-owned assets. So you get $8 million of PARA money in 5 Russian companies. They're divesting $7.2 million of that because of the sanctions on Russian banks and waiting to see if the feds will require them to divest the rest. When we talk about how much money that is compared to PARA's whole pot, their entire portfolio is north of $61 billion. The state pension fund isn't going to be the only account in Colorado that feels some effect from Russia's invasion. Gas prices for all of us are expected to rise a bit, despite the energy that's produced here in Colorado. Marshall Zellinger explains why any reduction in oil and gas coming from Russia will be felt everywhere.
When you've got a thick book on Europe on your shelf, and you're a professor of international relations and European politics at DU, you're a good resource on how a war thousands of miles away impacts us financially in Colorado.
A quarter of Europe's oil comes from Russia. I think 40% of European gas comes from Russia. To the extent that there are restrictions in those supplies coming from Russia, that means that energy supplies overall around the world are going to be constricted. And that's what could feed into higher fuel prices for Americans in the short term.
Even though oil and gas is produced in Colorado, gas prices are based on the price of a barrel of oil.
Oil trades on a global scale, so when you see that instability, you will begin to experience that here at the gas pump and the cost for heating our homes.
Even before this conflict, we were already expecting demand to outpace supply because of the downturn with COVID, because of the Russia, Saudi price war that occurred, in March of 2020. I mean, our economy and our industry is still in recovery mode.
Lynn Granger is the executive director of American Petroleum Institute, Colorado. She spent time in Ukraine in the U.S. Army after Russia invaded Crimea in 2014.
So I've really seen firsthand what it means to be dependent on another nation for your energy resources. And it's very real and it's very scary when things like this happen.
When you produce energy closer to home, it's easier to keep those costs lower.
When a major exporter of oil and gas is mired in war, like Russia, the ripple will be felt regardless of where we get our energy from.
It also means potentially for U.S. energy producers that there's more opportunities to export U.S. energy globally, which could ultimately be an upside. But I think in the short term, people can expect to pay more for energy.
Put simply, if Russia starts to cut off oil and gas supplies to other countries in Europe, those other countries will seek oil and gas elsewhere. Less product, demand increases. Everyone then feels the effect of war.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of those things where even though America's domestic production, at least over the last couple of years, has been sufficient for our needs in a way that has not been in a long time, so much of the rest of the world is so interconnected with Russia's supply that you're taking it out of the pot, you're taking it out for everybody.
And that's why anybody would feel it. Now, natural gas, what heats your home versus oil that everyone is trading for, like natural gas is more localized.
Yeah.
So if there were other efforts locally or nationally here, you may not feel the effect that much from what would happen in this Russian invasion, but because of the price of oil globally, everyone's going to feel that.
Marshall, thank you. We've talked on this program about the people in Colorado who are rescued from human trafficking. Quite often it's sex trafficking or people being trafficked for their labor. When those people break free, there's a nonprofit waiting to help them find housing, clothing, a safe, fresh start. And since Wednesday, you've raised nearly $19,000 to support the nonprofit Voluntad. If you scan the QR code on your screen or text the word thanks to 303-871-1491, I'll send you the link in joining me in giving to this nonprofit. This is specifically for a fund to help those survivors who often enter the nonprofit system with their children alongside them begin a fresh and safe start in life. Colorado's top prosecutor promises to use federal laws to go after fentanyl dealers.
I just don't want to see this forgotten and to fall into disrepair.
A World War I memorial has seen nearly a century of Colorado change around it, so now it may need to move. And it's tough to tell how cold it's been this week just by looking outside, because you might live next door to this guy. That's next. Colorado does not currently have a law that allows prosecutors to charge drug dealers with distribution of fentanyl causing death. The feds do have that kind of serious charge, and the top federal prosecutor in Colorado is publicly promising to use it, following the deaths of 5 people in Commerce City last weekend due to what appears to be fentanyl-laced cocaine.
What I can commit to you and to the public and to the citizens of Colorado is that we have a tool at our disposal. And the tool we have at our disposal is a federal law that allows us to prosecute these criminals, and we will prosecute these criminals. I don't know what impact always we can have on the demand for drugs. We believe we can have an impact on the supply. In doing that, we are focusing on the people who are at the root of the crime. We're trying to focus on the people who are making the drugs and distributing the drugs. That's where our attention is.
State Health Department says that fentanyl deaths in Colorado went from 49 deaths in 2016 to more than 800 last year. No drug killed more Coloradans than fentanyl.
We started off with sunshine today. Now clouds are rolling in. We almost made it to 30 degrees out at DIA this afternoon, but we will get above freezing tomorrow. A weak weather system is crossing Colorado from the northwest. There are no advisories for travel or for snow. It's a fast-moving system, but just be aware. A brief snow shower is possible here along the Front Range tonight, and a little bit of light snow for those of you that are headed up into the high country to get into some of that fresh powder for the weekend. Partly cloudy, a low of 20% chance of snow. It's out of here by tomorrow. Sunshine with highs near 40, close to 60 degrees for Sunday and Monday, and then hello March, highs above average in the mid to upper 60s for Wednesday, Thursday, and maybe Friday.
This is the start of calving season, but I don't think that that's what the term means. Doug's neighbor in Thornton was rocking the shorts while he was plowing snow in 2-degree weather the other day. As Doug points out, temperature is nothing but a number. They were placed in Colorado to welcome veterans home from the Great War. In the nearly century since, the state has changed around them.
And this for me is a connection to people who are no longer alive.
An effort to preserve a little-known bit of history. Tribute to brave Coloradans. Next. There are two stone pillars on the border between Lafayette and Erie. They've been there for nearly a century, and they kind of look it. They were built there in the 1920s, a welcome home and sign of respect for the service of World War I veterans. In the century since the Great War, much has changed around the intersection of US 287 and Arapahoe Road.
I think a lot of people are puzzled as to what they are and wonder why there are these two old stone towers in a busy intersection.
The pillars are unique. They're one of a kind.
Road of Remembrance Gateway.
The story behind the pillars is quite interesting.
It's a memorial to World War I soldiers.
Well, it was built and dedicated in 1928.
It's almost 100 years ago.
When it was dedicated, people came from all over the country to the dedication.
And this for me is a connection to people who are no longer alive, who are no longer with us. And I just don't want to see this forgotten and to fall into disrepair.
A few months ago, a number of us started looking into what would be the future of the pillars, because as they're presently located, particularly since the recent construction work done on the intersection, they're both in peril and in fact create a traffic hazard for people in that intersection.
The amount of traffic increases that I've seen, holy mackerel.
My hope is that the community working together can come up with a consensus and a plan that will allow the pillars to be preserved, whether in that spot or moved somewhere, but that also preserves the thought behind the pillars and the need that we all have to honor those who sacrificed in the World War, because they're why we're here today.
So we need to keep that memory alive.
Story through the lens of our photojournalist, Corky Scholl. First public forum on the future of the pillars is going to be held in early April. We'll keep you updated. Hey, we're doing something a little different with our favorite end of the week tradition today. We're going to pay some good news forward and share your feedback next. It's been a difficult week for anybody following the news, so I thought that we might do something different in lieu of our usual Friday sharing of the good news headlines in your week. I'd like to ask you to do something good for somebody this weekend. You know, any kind of kindness, big or small, just something that will give somebody else a reason to smile. If you happen to share or receive that kindness over the weekend, you're welcome to tell us about it. You keep it to yourself. We've done this together a few other times in the 6 years that this program has been on the air. And hey, even if not everybody remembers or does this, just think, tens of thousands of acts of kindness in Colorado this weekend, that could make an impact on the world. Joel Roberts writes in feedback of Polis's declaration the pandemic's over. He says the midterms are coming. Science has not changed. Or both. Both things could actually be true. Cameron says, thank you for acknowledging and considering us immunocompromised people. Too many seem to not consider us people. And Margaret Vincent says, new specs? Yes, I hope you will permit an occasionally bespeckled news anchor. See you next time.